Morning. How's everybody doing? Yeah, my voice good enough for somebody to wake up at 2 a.m.? I had just 3 cups of coffee before this, so hopefully this goes fine. So today we'll be talking about ensuring our every customer matters with end user monitoring. I'll in a minute mention what that means. My legal gets in between my slides and asks me to put this one in and talk about that it's all AppDynamics, property, et cetera, et cetera. With that said, I wanted us to kick off with this image. I think this image particularly has 2 interesting data points. One data point is that it seems like it's completely normal for an elephant to be walking along with the cars on the road, especially in this city. And then the second data point is it seems like the elephant's following the law by walking in the lane, but the car isn't. And I knew this joke will fall apart, and that's why I stopped my dreams of a stand-up comedian and jumped into the technology world. But this is actually the city I grew up in. It's called Jaipur. It's in India. If you haven't had a chance to go there, please go visit. It's terribly hot, though, around this time. If you thought yesterday was the hottest day of this year, then just double that temperature, and that's what it is right now there. Certainly would suggest to go there around winters. I grew up here, then I moved to Chicago for my education, and then to San Francisco, where I worked on consumer applications, mobile applications, as well as now working for AppDynamics on the enterprise side of things. So I look at things both from the perspective of the end users as well as our customers. Right? So I'll hopefully be able to bring in some of that knowledge today to this session. And towards the end, if you have questions, we'll also have a chance for that. With that said, I would love to know a little bit about you guys. And while I don't have time to go through every single person, let's just get a general sense. Raise your hand if you have used the APM solution from AppDynamics. Right. How many of you have used end user monitoring? Right. And how many of you have no idea what end user monitoring is? All right. Here's some folks. That helps me understand the level of details I should go in with the audience here. So thank you. Let's start talking about the business a little bit. When talking about the business, what's most important to our businesses? And often we get into the view of the technologies a lot. So it's certainly not the databases. That's not the most important thing to the businesses. That's not why businesses are built. It's not the servers either, or the network. It's also not the features that our teams are building. What's most important are the users. Users are the ones that are building our business. They can take our stock down to penny in a second. At the same time, they can really raise the value. And they have a cascading effect when they have influence over other people on how they look at your products, how they look at your websites, your services, and your technologies. So if users are the most important piece, we'll come back to that. This is what some of you mentioned you're using the APM product already. And this is probably what you're doing is understanding the application flow. Right? Earlier in the keynote, we also learned about the root causes and how you can do that with machine learning in a few steps. But essentially what you're doing here is you're trying to identify the business transaction, the flow of the application in the back end. And backend sort of serves as the centerpiece to all the different places that users are interacting through. So it's super important to understand what your backend is doing. But it's not the complete picture. Right? I'll take an example here. We all have smartphones these days. And these smartphones have become extremely complex. The iPhone's latest X version, or iPhone 10, and they have the A11 chip. that supposedly have more than 4 billion transistors in there. That's a lot of transistors, and that's a lot of complexity in this small piece of technology. But when users or the buyers of these iPhones, they go onto the Apple Store or onto the websites, they don't ask the questions of how many transistors do you have, and are those transistors working with each other fine? They just expect that that's what's going to happen, that there is some complex technology in there, that it's working. But the kind of questions they are asking are, what are some of the newer features in this iPhone? They care about the beauty of the phone as well. They don't directly interact with the transistors. Maybe they interact with the transistors indirectly. But they don't know that. And we can relate that very easily to our businesses as well. Our back end is almost like this transistor and this chip, that it's very important for the functioning of our phone, but it's not the only piece. It's not what attracts the users onto our websites or onto our applications and businesses. It's the value that you are serving end-to-end to them. So from that perspective, if we look at this flow again, what's important is to understand the user, the flow of the user. It's important to understand who these users are, what's their behavior, how do they interact with the application code, and then how does that code interact with and correlates to the backend. And that's the full picture. So that's your users, if they're trying to do the login or any other kind of processing, they're interacting with one of these technologies. It could be browser, could be mobile, or in some case, connected devices. For example, set-top boxes. Right? In your homes, you interact with TVs, Apple TVs, Roku TVs, Sky TVs. These are very common these days. And when people are interacting with those devices, that's essential part of the business. You need to understand what these users are doing there and how it relates to your overall business value. So essentially, that's what we'll be talking about. That was just a setup to this talk track. We'll be talking about end-user monitoring, to understand your end users, to understand what are they doing, what are some of the challenges they are hitting, being proactive in our approach to these customers. And just to summarize, these users are interacting with your businesses, hopefully in one of the 3 ways or all 3 ways these days, which is browser, mobile, and connected devices. Now, in order to monitor this, we have 2 different ways we can approach this. One is what we call synthetic monitoring, and some of you may have heard about it before, and the other is real user monitoring. We'll focus first on the synthetic monitoring. The way I look at it is more like what robots can do. And the real user monitoring is more like what humans can do. Robots could do very little these days, but in future, hopefully, they'll be able to do a lot more than what they do. So let's look at the synthetic monitoring. And I'll take this example, that absence of errors does not imply correctness. That if you don't have any errors, if you don't have any slowness on your systems, in your environments, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything is fine. Right? So errors or latencies are not the only measure of performance. Let's look at this example. What's going on here is somebody's trying to purchase, apparently, a Tesla Model 3 on a website. Right? And as they are trying to purchase it, it's showing up as the price of that particular Tesla to be $0. Wouldn't that be amazing? Right? But there is no exception there. There is no exception on the website. There are no errors. There is no latency. Somebody is on the checkout screen. Looks great. There is no exception on the server side. There are no exceptions on DBs or anywhere else in the system. But the price is still 0. Right? So the business is impacted by this particular issue. What you need to do is have a real-time visibility into something that's constantly running through your websites and measuring what's working, taking the screenshots, and alerting you when something goes wrong. I actually picked up this example from one of the articles. This is about a UK company where their products on Amazon showed up for a penny. You don't need to read through this article, but essentially somebody was even able to purchase more than $30,000 worth of stuff for a penny. You don't want that to be happening to your business, otherwise a lot of people's jobs on the line. What you need is the synthetic monitoring, and that we have set up the robots across the world, and these bots are able to constantly run scripts and understand how your environments are behaving. And they would be able to identify that the price is showing up as 0, that it would send a critical alert that the price is less than $10,000. It'll even take a screenshot of that particular page and send you and show you that particular screenshots and identify that there is an exception somewhere at the back-end side of it. You don't want these kind of issues to be discovered by real users. So that's roughly what robots can do. That it's not possible for a human eye to go through the website and every instances of it at every single point in time across the globe, that we can have some robots do that job for us. Let's look at what real user monitoring could do, or what you could do for your real users. So remember, we started talking about this concept of user, that the user is the most important piece to your business. So first thing, maybe what you would care about is user behavior. In this user behavior, you would want to do things like funnel analysis. You would want to understand what segments of areas and geographies your users are coming from. You would also want to run some kind of query on the user data. I won't talk through every single instance of it, but I'll take a few examples in each of these areas and show you how AppDynamics provides that visibility and that information through end user monitoring. So let's look at the funnel analysis first. I'm sure a lot of you do funnel analysis today with products like GA, Mixpanel, so on, where you create the dashboards that are important to your businesses. And often organizations, these are called the BI teams or analytics team or digital transformation teams. They are looking at roughly this kind of dashboard to say, what's our conversion? What are the most important users, like platinum users, doing on our website? Where are the drop-offs? Right? So you are trying to essentially understand the drop-offs through these kind of dashboards. But what would be amazing is if you can tie those drop-offs to the performance of the application, that there is an application issue, and hence a lot of people are dropping off at a certain step. And then you can drill down and really identify the root cause of that particular problem. Second part's the segmentation of user behavior. You need to understand where your users are coming from. These users, when the new iPhone launches, you'd want to understand what percentage of your traffic is coming from these new iPhones and newer versions of iOS, or Wi-Fi versus 3G, and so on. You really need to understand, because when the issues happen, you would really want to drill into if you should focus and spend any energy on fixing those issues at all. Like if, for example, in this browser case, if all of the world is moving on to Chrome, but my users are stuck onto IE or maybe Safari, then when the issues happen on Chrome, you may not care as much about these issues, but you may care about these issues when they happen on IE or Safari. Those are the kind of data points you can pick up from this segmentation. You also would want to understand the geolocation of your users, where they are coming from, because the expectations of users could be very different based on where they come from in the geographical region. So somebody in Asia could have very different expectation on what your end user response time should be versus somebody in the UK. Those are different norms, different expectations. Here's an example. So in this case, while it's hard to see, what it shows is end user response time is really high in Spain and Greece. It shows up to be about 2 seconds each, 2 to 2.5 seconds. But when you look at the bottom part, it's showing you how much traffic is coming from different geolocations. And Spain and Greece are nowhere close on the top 5. So even if the response time is quite high in some of these locations, you don't care enough about it. You'd rather work on your features and build your features for the regions that are more popular for your application. So it helps you vet out what you should focus your energy in and what you shouldn't. So we looked at the user behavior, and we understood what the user is doing. The next thing these users are doing are they are interacting with the application. Right? They are interacting with the screens on one of these devices. So we should really understand the user interaction. And this user interaction piece, we should look at user sessions or user journeys, application screenshots. We should also look at user actions, screen transitions, device dashboards, things like that. Things that would help us understand exactly what individual user is doing on my application. So let's take an example of a user session. These are the user journeys. Let's say a user, Kyle, has called up to your customer support or some other service team and said, I'm really pissed at your application because it's super slow. It doesn't work very well for me. If you get that kind of call, or if somebody starts reporting issues on Twitter, where do you go from there? What I've often seen people do is scramble around and say, geez, there must be something wrong, but I don't know where to look, so I'll look everywhere. That's a lot of waste of energy. What you should rather do is just search for that user, look at all the user journeys they have taken through your application, and maybe pick one of them. So this is a screenshot that shows all the Kyle's user journeys through a mobile application. And then you would want to look at what happened on the last one. Maybe that's what Kyle's complaining about. And you look at, on the left side of it, it starts to show you the screens Kyle went through, and on the right side, it starts to show you what Kyle did on each of those screens and how the application code behaved as it relates to that user interaction. It even points out where Kyle was touching or clicking on your screen, so the button clicks, for example, or the text field inputs. And none of it is personally identifiable information so far, other than Kyle's email or user ID, which we don't pick automatically. We depend on the businesses or yourself to tell us. It could also be a proxy, like an ID, which has nothing to do with Kyle, but you could use to search for Kyle in your database. Right. So now we know where Kyle was hitting on the button, which screens Kyle went through, in this case, the cart view, and a lot of time was spent on a specific network request. And we'll come back to it in a few seconds. But what you may also want to understand is, what did that screen look like when Kyle interacted with your application? Right. This is exactly what Kyle's screen looked like when Kyle was interacting with the product selection screen. It seems rather weird that it has both the men's clothes and the women's clothes all on the same section. I've rarely seen that. But this is a made-up example, so it's possible here. But what it is also showing is where Kyle's touching. So those pink circles in there, where it says shop men, maybe that's what Kyle hit. Right. So now you really get to the granular level of Kyle called me in. These are the screens Kyle went through. This is what Kyle was doing. These are the buttons Kyle was hitting. This is Kyle was touching on the screen to understand and debug issues. I think an obvious question comes to mind by looking at this kind of screen is, our business doesn't allow capturing this kind of data. Right? This could be seen as PII, PCI kind of data. We can talk more about it towards the end, but essentially there are controls built where you can control which screens do we take for screenshots? And where we pause and don't take the screenshots. That's where Kyle was hitting. The other question that could come here is, well, you're a performance tool, and if you're sending images over the network, you're eating up a lot of my bandwidth, right? And if you're eating up a lot of my bandwidth, you're affecting the performance of my application. So why would I use something like this? Well, we have come up with a patented technology on this particular part where we break up the screen into 16 individual blocks. And then we only send over the diffs. So if for first few users, we have already sent over those blocks, the image is going to look more or less similar for most of the users. The application doesn't change a whole lot other than their names and maybe some of the recommendations in there. And that helps reduce the footprint a lot. If you have millions of users, we'll send it for a few users, and then that would be about it. We'll just reference those images in blocks. Let's look at device dashboards. Another scenario for user interaction could be, hey, I don't have a single user using one particular application. Again, the example could be TVs, right? In the TV's case, my whole family is watching the TV, so I don't have a notion of this is the particular user that the Kyle logged into my application. I have a notion of a device, which is my TV, and I would want to understand my applications running on that TV and relate to my business. As you do that, you want to understand what devices are doing, what's their usage, what's the performance of these devices, and how it relates to your backend. When there are latencies, the issues may not always happen on the front-end side. They can also happen on the back-end side. I knew a lot of you would be quite bored, so I thought I would pull up my second fun fact after that elephant. When I searched for my city on Google, these two images showed up, one with the elephant and the other with the snake. It's quite common that you would make these snakes, and these are poisonous snakes, dance in front of you, and people actually enjoy it. It seems rather odd to me now that I'm out of that environment. And in my childhood days, somebody like these people would come home, they would open up the box, and a snake would start coming out. It would be like, wait, should I even open the door? But this is completely normal. Again, something to watch when you go visit this place next time. We talked about the user interaction, and the next thing that would happen is when users have interacted with your applications, this would in turn interact with an application code, right? You're writing your code in Xcode, JavaScript, Android, et cetera. As users interact with the screen interacts with the code, which is where your application code comes into picture. So the next level of details you would want to understand are the application code or diagnostics level of information. Things like crash reporting, that the application is hanging, errors and exceptions. Also, things like custom data, out-of-the-box health rule alerts, mobile scorecards. Some of these things are what would help you debug the issues, diagnose the problems really quickly. Let's take a few examples of that scenario. So crash reporting. Almost everybody has crash reporting tool for their mobile applications. There are a lot of vendors who do that. What I go back to when I look at crash reporting is how do you reproduce an issue? And I used to be an engineer in my past life. Before I aspired to be a stand-up comedian. I was also an engineer. My manager would come to me and say, hey, AJ, I just heard that our application is crashing. Can you go look at it? I would go into the tool. I would look at the stack trace. And I would say, this is the line that's crashing. And I would try to reproduce that issue, and it wouldn't crash for me. And then I would go back to my manager and say, so it must be happening for only few users. It must be happening only for few users because I can't reproduce this issue. So maybe a lot of people who are going through the same line of code, it's just working fine. It's not always the line of code that's causing the problem. It's often how users have interacted with your application and a specific flow that they have gone through, specific things that they have done on your application. So things like this, which is the view session, you're able to understand, it takes you to the user journey, shows you exactly the steps a user went through, shows you what they were doing on the application, and at what point the application crashed. Now I have a full view of, I'm going to go follow those steps, reproduce the issue, know the line of code that's crashing, and I have a full view and the context of fixing that problem really quickly. And that's what's important for crash reporting. The second thing that we don't often talk about is application hanging. I'm sure you all have had situations where you were using a mobile application and just hung. You tried clicking on buttons or screens and it didn't do anything at all, right? It doesn't necessarily result into a crash, but it's a bad user experience. If you go through the App Store these days, a lot of reviews are not necessarily about that your application is crashing. The reviews are about that the application doesn't work for me. Or it would pop up a message that says something went wrong. In all those scenarios, while crash is a fatal issue, these end up being non-fatal issues, or what we call code issues. So we now have an ability where you can have a full dashboard that shows you what percentage of your users are affected by it, what are the top issues, what is the severity of those. You look at the stack trace of those, also look at the user journeys and reproduce those issues as well. That's an industry first that we are bringing up to our customer base as well as our future customer base. It really should get you down to almost like call graphs on your APM product. Next is health scorecard. And the other thing that happened to me when I was a developer, even as a product manager, is somebody walking in the hall would say, how are our mobile applications doing? I would be like, yeah, they're fine. Like, our rating hasn't changed really. Or I would go into details of what could be wrong. But really, I didn't have a view where I can say the application is fine or application is not fine. Right? You should have this kind of view where you can put out all your applications by each other side and say, if it's red, then it's not working fine, or if it's green, it's working fine. I should be able to answer that question in a second. And if it's red, really understand what is really causing this issue, or what's causing my application to be not healthy. So we have looked at all those three areas. Next thing that application code is doing now is interacting with the cloud. It's interacting through the APIs to the backend. And it's trying to gather the information. It's trying to do the processing in the cloud or on the data centers. So from that perspective, you'd want to understand end-to-end correlation. You'd want to understand dynamic baselining. Because often when issues happen, the first team that gets blamed is the one on the front-end side. Because the issue has happened for a user on one of these applications. But the root cause may not be on the front-end side. So you want to be quickly able to vet out and say, this is really where the problem is, and let's not bother about looking across our stack. So from that perspective, the kind of questions you should really answer is, do you know exactly what is causing the latency? That it's not just about the end user response time from start to end. It's also about breaking that down and saying, this is what in that end user response time that's causing the latencies. It could be network, could be the DOM, it could be server time, could be so many different issues. Right? But until you break it down, you don't have that full visibility. Similarly, for end-to-end correlation, we have, when you look at this kind of view, it points out the greens where everything is fine. It also points out things that are very slow. You should be able to go from there to your back-end correlation. Again, we talked about this earlier in the keynote, and then dive into the deep level to database query or line of code that's causing that latency. You should be able to quickly go through that rather than finger pointing. But that wouldn't be possible if you didn't have end users' behavior and their view in the world. All right. So just to summarize, we have talked about users' behavior, their interaction with the application code, and the API's cloud. And you need to have that full unified visibility across the board. It's not sufficient to say, oh, I have a user interaction from this one place. I have maybe APM or API's cloud covered from APM space of AppDynamics, and other places I'll just put in the custom events. Now, it wouldn't be sufficient if I said all of this is possible, but it's only possible for certain technology like native applications. You should be able to build any kinds of applications you want and monitor them any way you want. So we now have support for single-page applications, hybrid applications on mobile, along with the native applications that we already had. And now we are also covering the connected devices, which are non-mobile and non-browser kind of devices. That said, I want to just quickly summarize that in one sentence of what we have talked about. That we need to have a unified visibility from users' behavior to every single line of code in the backend. So it's covering that breadth. So user behavior to every single line of code in the backend. Because your software stack, your IT system is all serving the same business. It's not different teams, it's not different technologies, it's not different goals. The goal is to satisfy and keep the customers and users happy. Right? As we talked about, users are the most important pieces for the business. With that said, I have a couple slides just on GDPR. It seems to be the most talked about thing after the royal wedding. At least that's what in the US we hear about. It's like the royal wedding and GDPR. I just quickly want to point out what GDPR means and what we are doing at AppDynamics to support those requirements. So GDPR, as most of you know, is the General Data Protection Regulations. It came in effect on 25th May. The larger premise of that was the user's data is owned by users or customers' data is owned by customers. If you're capturing name, full name, address, etc., that is all owned by end users and customers. So to AppDynamics, while we don't capture anything of your user's data directly unless you report it in, we do have your data into AppDynamics. Right? You are our users, you are our customers. In that sense, you can allow and you can delete the data through AppDynamics. Right now, it's available through the ops ticket or CS tickets. We can delete any of the EUM, analytics, controller data within the 30 days time period, which is the regulation. We are also working on automating a lot of pieces of that, that it doesn't take actually 30 minutes in future, that you can just do it at a single click. Right? So that's what on AppDynamics we have done to support GDPR. Again, happy to take those questions when we get into that session.